I worked as a correctional officer in a maximum security prison located in the middle of nowhere. It was 2017, a time when my life revolved around endless night shifts and a crumbling marriage. As exhausting as the night shifts were, they gave me a sense of calm. The atmosphere in the prison was heavy, sure, but I liked the routine. On that particular night, everything seemed normal. We had just finished the nightly head count, carefully checking each cell with surgical precision. Locks secured, numbers matching. So far, so good. Around 3 a.m., things started to go downhill. I was in the monitoring room with my colleague, Matt, a younger guy, full of energy but a bit paranoid about the cameras. Suddenly, he frowned and pointed to one of the screens. "Do you see that?" he asked hesitantly. I looked, but didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. It was the corridor for Block D, home to the most dangerous inmates. A place you didn't enter without good reason. The lights flickered faintly, which wasn't unusual, but there was something off about the scene. It felt too empty, too quiet. We decided to check the corridor. As we walked, the sound of our boots echoed in a way that made my skin crawl. When we reached cell 204, I knew something was wrong. The door was locked, as it should be, but the inmate, a guy named Anthony, was nowhere to be seen. Anthony was notorious, convicted for leading a major crime ring. The kind of guy who wouldn't just disappear without making a scene. My first thought was that he'd dug a tunnel or pulled some escape trick, but the cell was intact. No broken walls, no signs of digging. We rushed back to the monitoring room. Matt was pale, his eyes glued to the screens. He rewound the footage from the entire night, starting from the last head count. There was Anthony, sitting on his bunk until exactly 2:15 a.m. Then, he was gone. No noise, no movement in the cell. The weirdest part? Nobody appeared in the hallways. Nobody entered or exited. It was as if he had just vanished into thin air. That's when I felt something I'd never experienced before. A dry, primal fear, born from the realization that something impossible was happening right in front of us. While Matt reviewed the footage for the third time, I decided to call our supervisor. Jake was a tough guy, ex-military, always skeptical of anything outside the standard protocol. When I explained what we had seen, he sighed, clearly annoyed, thinking it was some technical glitch. "Check the locks, look for signs of tampering. That guy didn't just vanish," he said, already grabbing the radio to call for a sweep. So we retraced our steps through the block, but as before, there was absolutely nothing out of place. The locks were secure, and the other inmates acted like they knew nothing, or were very good at pretending. Back in the monitoring room, Jake insisted on reviewing the footage himself. He paused every frame, advancing slowly, searching for anything unusual. Then, something appeared that made all of us freeze. At exactly 2:16 a.m., a shadow appeared inside Anthony's cell. It wasn't large, but it seemed to float, flickering like smoke. It hovered for a few seconds and then disappeared. Right after that, Anthony was gone. Jake didn't say a word. He was the type of man who always had a logical explanation for everything, but now he stood stiff, clearly shaken. After a long pause, he straightened his back and masked his discomfort. Matt started asking nervous questions. Could someone on the outside have hacked the cameras? Or is this some kind of collective hallucination? I wanted to believe one of those options, but my gut told me it was something far darker. The shadow didn't look like a glitch or interference. It felt alive, in a way that chilled us to the bone. Even the air in the room felt heavier, like we were breathing static electricity. Jake finally broke the silence. "This doesn't leave this room. Officially, this is a glitch or a breakout. Nothing more." The rest of the night dragged on endlessly. While other officers searched the perimeter, Matt and I stayed in the monitoring room, tasked with watching the cameras, though I could barely focus. My mind kept replaying what I had seen. The worst part was the sense of being watched, not by the cameras or the inmates, but by something I couldn't define. The shadow from the footage felt omnipresent, even if it wasn't visible anymore. Matt confessed he felt like someone was constantly standing behind him, but every time he turned, there was nothing there. Around 5 in the morning, when the night shift was nearing its end, Jake decided to organize one last sweep of Cell 204, this time with a full team. The tension was palpable, as if everyone knew something was wrong but refused to say it out loud. We entered the corridor in silence, flashlights on, even though the lights were working. The cell seemed darker than before. Every step we took echoed like a dull drumbeat. When we unlocked the door, a strange smell hit us. It wasn't rotting, but something chemical, like burnt ozone mixed with hot metal. The team searched every corner. They checked the mattress, the plumbing, even tiny cracks in the concrete. Everything was intact. But it was Matt who found something that froze us in place. In the darkest corner of the cell, almost invisible, there was a mark on the floor. It was a perfect circle, as if it had been burned into the surface. Inside the circle were strange symbols none of us could identify. Jake immediately ordered everyone to back away. He took photos and made a note in the report, but you could tell he was uneasy, maybe even scared. I had never seen Jake like that before, and it only made the whole situation feel worse. When we got back to the monitoring room, the radio started to crackle. At first it was just static, but then we heard something that sounded like heavy breathing, deep and animal-like. Jake tried to respond, but the radio wouldn't transmit. He turned it off and back on, but the crackling continued. Suddenly, a voice emerged from the static. It was low, raspy, and said something I'll never forget. "He doesn't belong to you anymore." Then the radio went silent. We all stared at each other, speechless. Matt was sweating, and my throat felt dry, like the air around us had vanished. Jake was the first to speak. He calmly turned off the radio and told us this incident wasn't to be spoken of. "Tomorrow we'll report this as a breakout. No evidence, no trace. That's the end of it." But no one believed it would be that simple. I went home that morning, but I couldn't sleep. The entire night kept replaying in my head. The footage, the shadow, the circle, the voice on the radio. No matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, nothing made sense. It felt like something had infiltrated the prison, something that didn't follow the rules of our world. The next few days were a blur. The official version, as Jake had decided, was that Anthony had escaped, although no one truly believed it. The other inmates started spreading rumors, each more bizarre than the last. Some said Anthony had sold his soul to escape. Others whispered about secret rituals he performed in his cell. One of them, an old-timer who'd been there for decades, told me something I'll never forget. "There are things you can't lock away. Sometimes they come to collect what's theirs." I laughed nervously, but those words stuck with me. The following nights on shift were unbearable. I avoided Block D, but even far from it, I could feel the same presence lingering. Matt requested a transfer shortly after, saying he couldn't work there anymore. He didn't explain much, but one look at his face was enough to see he was broken, as if he'd seen something he couldn't unsee. Jake, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened, though you could see in his eyes that it wasn't over for him either. He shut down any mention of Cell 204 immediately, and no one dared bring it up again. About a week later, I got an unexpected call. It was one of the tech guys who worked on the security cameras. He had gone through the footage again without authorization and found something no one had noticed before. In one specific frame, just after Anthony's disappearance, there was a reflection caught on the corridor camera. It looked like a face, but not a human one. The eyes were empty, like hollow pits, and the jaw was unnaturally elongated. The tech guy hung up shortly after, saying he didn't want to be involved anymore. I put the phone down and felt a chill run up my spine. I decided then and there that I'd never set foot in that prison again. Today, years later, I still think about that night. I quit the job shortly after and moved to another city, trying to leave it all behind. But sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling like something is watching me. I don't know what happened to Anthony, and honestly, I don't want to know. The only thing I do know is that, on that night, I realized there are things we can't control or understand. And no matter how hard we try to ignore them, they never really leave. I've been working as a prison guard for almost 15 years. It's a tough job, but in a strange way, it gave me a sense of order. Back then, I was assigned to a maximum security prison in the middle of nowhere. My routine was predictable, almost monotonous, something I considered a good thing. My shifts involved patrolling the corridors, inspecting cells, and dealing with some of the most dangerous people you can imagine. But one inmate in particular never struck me as dangerous in the usual way. His name was Carter, and his threat wasn't physical, it was psychological. He had a reputation for being manipulative, the kind of person who got under your skin. I always kept my distance, but I never thought he'd end up affecting me personally. It all started on a Wednesday morning during a routine cell inspection. Carter had this way of looking at you that made you feel small, like he could see things about you that even you didn't know. But that day, it wasn't his stare that unsettled me. It was a folded piece of paper I found tucked under his mattress. It was filled with scribbles and numbers that, at first glance, seemed random. When I asked him about it, he just smiled and said, "Some things can't be explained so easily, officer." This wasn't the first time he'd left cryptic messages, but something about that smile left me with an odd, uneasy feeling, like a storm brewing in the distance. I left the paper on the security desk and went about my shift. The day passed without incident, but that night I couldn't get the paper out of my head. I picked it up and examined it more closely. The numbers were arranged in pairs and sequences that resembled dates and times. I didn't know what they meant, but there was an intentionality to them that I couldn't shake. It was late, and I chalked it up to paranoia. I folded the paper, shoved it in a drawer, and went home. Still, the unease lingered. Like an itch in the back of my mind I couldn't quite scratch. The next day, Carter seemed unusually calm, almost smug. During my rounds, he gave me a nod as if he knew something I didn't. Later that afternoon, while I was having lunch, the staff radio was tuned to the local news. A report caught my attention. A fire at a convenience store had claimed 2 lives. It wouldn't have stood out so much if not for the exact time of the fire, 2:15 a.m. I ran back to the security desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out Carter's paper. There it was, 02:15. That uneasy feeling turned into a knot in my stomach. At that moment, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Carter had never left the prison, so how could he possibly know about something happening outside? Logic told me it was impossible, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I decided to investigate further but kept it to myself. If I went to the other guards with this, they'd laugh me out of the room. That night, while everyone else was asleep, I pulled out Carter's paper and started cross-referencing the numbers with recent incidents in the city. It didn't take long to notice a pattern. Another set of numbers matched the date and time of a car accident that killed 3 people. The connection was undeniable, but how could it be real? The next morning, Carter was unusually talkative. He called me by name, something he rarely did, and asked, "Sleep well, officer? It's hard to rest when your mind keeps showing you things." I tried to brush it off, but he kept talking, his tone almost casual. "I always knew you'd be the first to understand." His words echoed in my mind the rest of the day. He knew I had looked at the numbers. He knew I was starting to put the pieces together. The following morning, I decided to confront him. I brought the paper with me and stepped into his cell during my round. "How do you know these things?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, that same unsettling smile that seemed to dig into my soul, and said, "I don't know. Maybe you're asking the wrong questions, officer. Have you ever thought that it's not about the how, but the why? Before I could respond, he added, "And what if I told you this isn't about me? It's about you?" A chill ran down my spine. His words carried a weight I couldn't explain. I spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of what he meant. About me? What kind of psychological game was he playing? It didn't make sense, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. Carter never said anything without a purpose. He wanted me to think about this, to dig deeper. That night, I made a decision. I had to figure out where his information was coming from. Whether he was manipulating someone on the outside or there was another explanation, I had to get to the bottom of it, even if it meant bending a few rules. My chance came a few days later when Carter was taken to the infirmary for a medical checkup. While he was out, I took the opportunity to thoroughly search his cell. I found a notebook hidden inside the mattress lining, filled with cryptic notes. It wasn't just dates and times. There were also vague descriptions of events, always written in a dark tone, like, "The fire will consume," or "The shadows devour." Something about that notebook made my skin crawl. Each page seemed to carry an emotional weight, a sense of dread and inevitability. I copied some of the pages and left everything exactly as it was before leaving the cell. That night, I went home determined to decode the messages. It took hours, but as I cross-referenced the notes with recent news and even minor incidents, I realized they didn't just predict major tragedies. They also matched small, everyday occurrences. A missing person here, an argument there. The accuracy was terrifying. Then I found something that froze me in my tracks. A future date, just 2 days away, with the exact time and the name of a street I knew well. It was near my son's school. Beside the entry was the chilling note, "The innocent will pay for the observer's choices." Carter was talking about me. For the next 48 hours, I was on high alert. I took time off work and spent the entire day parked on that street. I didn't know what to expect, but I refused to let something happen without trying to stop it. When the time came, I saw a car speeding through a red light. A child on the sidewalk, distracted, stepped onto the street. Without thinking, I ran and pulled the boy back just seconds before the car could hit him. The driver didn't even slow down. The boy wasn't my son, but my neighbor's child. And yet, I couldn't ignore what it meant. Carter knew. He knew everything. The next day, I returned to the prison determined to confront Carter again, but when I reached his cell, it was empty. I asked another guard what had happened, and he casually told me Carter had been transferred to another facility in the middle of the night. I couldn't believe it. He left no message, no clue, just that notebook, which now felt like a puzzle I could never solve. To this day, I don't know how he knew all those things or why he chose me to bear this burden. But one thing is certain. After Carter, I was never the same. I worked as a corrections officer for almost 8 years and thought I had seen it all. My shift was the night shift, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. in a medium security facility. It was a job that required constant attention, but over time, you learn to handle the environment. Back then, I was 32, living alone, and I actually liked the nighttime routine. It was quieter, less chaotic than the daytime shifts. I had my protocols down, hourly rounds, detailed logs, and always keeping an eye out for anything unusual. That specific night started off like any other, calm and uneventful. The block I was assigned to housed 36 inmates split between 2 wings. It was one of those places where the silence could be as oppressive as the noise. The cold fluorescent lighting gave everything a blue hue, and the constant hum of the surveillance cameras added to the sense of unease. They watched me as much as I watched them. During my first round of the night, I noticed one of the inmates, Kevin, seemed more restless than usual. He was known for being manipulative, always testing boundaries. But since nothing concrete happened, I continued with my routine. Around midnight, the intercom from Wing A crackled to life. Kevin's voice came through, hoarse and panicked. He claimed he couldn't breathe and needed urgent help. It wasn't uncommon for inmates to exaggerate medical conditions to get attention or some sort of advantage. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed my radio and let the tower know I was heading over to check. When I got to the cell, I found Kevin lying on the floor, clutching his chest as if he were having a heart attack. My gut told me something was off, but the protocol was clear. Handle medical emergencies immediately. I opened the slot in the cell door to get a closer look and asked him to talk to me, but he only muttered incoherent words. That's when I noticed a strange movement in the cell next to his. One of the other inmates stood unnervingly close to the bars, partially hidden in shadow, watching me intently. In that moment, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't normal for someone to be so invested in another inmate's emergency. Then I realized something even more disturbing. The entire wing was unusually quiet. None of the usual comments or jeers. It was an unnatural silence that made my chest tighten, as if something unseen was about to unfold. As I processed the unsettling silence, I heard a faint, rhythmic noise. It seemed to be coming from one of the cells at the far end of the hall. A soft, metallic tapping against the concrete. Random noises during the night weren't unusual, but this felt deliberate. I turned to check it out, but the corridor appeared empty. When I looked back at Kevin, he had shifted his position. Now he was sitting up, staring directly at me with a crooked smile. The sudden change in his demeanor made my stomach churn. "Feeling better now?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He didn't answer. He just kept staring, his expression mocking my presence. Suddenly my radio crackled, making me jump. It was the tower officer, asking why I hadn't responded sooner. I grabbed the radio quickly and explained I was dealing with a medical situation, but static disrupted the line. Before I could repeat myself, a loud metallic sound echoed behind me. I spun around and saw that one of the cell doors across the block was slightly open. That was impossible. The locks were automatic and could only be opened manually from the control room. My heartbeat raced. I glanced at the nearby control panel, and its indicator lights were flickering erratically, as if something was tampering with the system. Adrenaline coursing through me, I began backing toward the corridor exit, trying to think through my next steps. Kevin was still sitting there, but now he was muttering something under his breath, like a chant I couldn't make out. Then I heard quick, deliberate footsteps echoing from multiple directions. It sounded like they were trying to surround me. I knew I needed to get out of there, but the exit felt impossibly far. Grabbing my radio again, I called for backup, explaining that something was wrong. My voice shook, but I tried to stay composed. The response was garbled with static, but I caught enough to know help was on the way. All I needed to do was hold on. Just as I took another step, the hallway lights flickered and went out for a few seconds. In the pitch black, my breathing quickened. When the lights came back on, Kevin was no longer in his cell. The floor where he had been sitting was empty, as if he had vanished. I scanned the area, searching for any trace of him, and then I saw a shadow darting quickly toward the stairs leading to the lower level. I tried to convince myself he couldn't have escaped without me noticing, but deep down, I knew this was far more than just a simple escape attempt. The entire block felt alive with hostility, and I realized every second mattered. My only option at that moment was to reach the control room at the end of the hallway. From there, I could manually lock down the block and buy some time until reinforcements arrived. Every step I took echoed loudly in the silence, each sound amplifying my unease. The other cells were still eerily quiet, which only heightened my suspicion. It felt like the inmates were all in on something, waiting for the right moment. I passed the cell with the slightly open door, forcing myself to ignore the cold dread creeping up my spine. Inside, I noticed scratches on the floor, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. They looked like claw marks, but that didn't make any sense. I forced myself to keep moving. When I reached the control room, I turned the key to unlock the door and quickly stepped inside, locking it behind me. For the first time in minutes, I exhaled deeply. The control panel was blinking erratically, as if the system had been overloaded or tampered with. I tried to initiate a block lockdown, but the controls weren't responding. It was as if someone had completely cut off access. My radio crackled again, and this time I heard something that froze me in place. A distorted, low voice was repeating my name. It was impossible to tell where it was coming from, but the tone was deeply unsettling, almost otherworldly. My throat tightened as I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to be standing behind me. Outside, I heard the sound of multiple cell doors opening at once. My stomach dropped. The only thing separating me from the chaos was the door to the control room. I grabbed my baton and stood by the door, listening as the sounds grew closer. Heavy, dragging footsteps mixed with muffled laughter and a metallic clanging, like someone was banging a set of keys against the bars. This wasn't a normal escape attempt. They were toying with me, and the feeling of being hunted was suffocating. My mind raced, trying to piece together how they had coordinated this so perfectly. It all felt like part of a meticulously planned trap. Suddenly, the door began to shake violently, as if someone on the other side was pounding on it with increasing force. Each hit reverberated through me, and the metal bar locking the door felt less secure with every strike. Sweat dripped down my face as I tried to decide what to do. I had two options: wait and hope the reinforcements arrived in time, or risk crawling through the ventilation shaft in the corner of the room. I had never felt so alone. It wasn't just fear of what was out there, but a gnawing sensation that something was fundamentally wrong, like the block itself was alive. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the banging stopped, leaving an oppressive silence that made even my breathing seem too loud. When I started working as a corrections officer, I knew the job would be tough. I was 25 at the time, fresh out of training, still adjusting to the late-night shifts. The prison wasn't the largest, but it had its share of strange stories. During my first month, I was assigned to the maximum security wing, a place where the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating. I never brought work home with me. I'd learned quickly to separate who I was in uniform from who I was outside of it. At least that's what I thought. It started subtly. One night, during my rounds, I passed by the solitary confinement cell of an inmate named Kyle. He was quiet, with a history of violent behavior, but he'd mellowed out in recent months. He spent hours sitting on his bunk, drawing. It wasn't unusual to see inmates drawing. For many, it was a way to pass the time. But something about his drawings made me stop. The pages scattered on the cell floor showed incredibly detailed portraits of faces I recognized. At first I thought I was imagining things, but when I crouched down to get a better look, my heart nearly stopped. It was my little sister, Katie. I froze. Katie was only 14, and I'd never talked about her at work, not once. Her face was there on the page, drawn with eerie precision, down to the small scar on her chin and the way her hair fell over her shoulders. I took a deep breath, trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was a generic face that happened to look like Katie. But then I saw another drawing, and my stomach dropped. It was my dad sitting in his favorite chair in the living room, holding the newspaper just like he always did. I tried to stay professional. How does he know this? I thought, my palms sweating inside my gloves. I asked Kyle, trying to sound firm, but my voice came out shaky. "Where did you see these people?" He looked up slowly, a faint, unsettling smile on his face. "I see what they do when you're not looking," he said, almost in a whisper. His words echoed in my mind long after I left the cell. I walked out of that wing with shaky legs, but tried to keep my composure until I reached the monitoring room. There, I sat in the hard plastic chair, staring at the security screens without really seeing them. Kyle's voice echoed in my head. How did he know about my family? I tried to think rationally. Maybe he had seen something on social media. Maybe someone I knew had talked about me. But that didn't make sense. I was careful. My profiles were private. I rarely posted, and I never mentioned where I worked. That same night, I couldn't resist the urge to go back to Kyle's cell. He was asleep, or at least pretending to be. I gathered the scattered pages from the floor while he softly snored. I almost regretted it immediately. There were more drawings. One showed my mom standing in the backyard, watering her plants. Another depicted my older brother Adam, driving the car he had recently purchased. Each detail was disturbingly accurate, like he had been there, watching. But that was impossible. It had to be impossible, right? I decided to take the pages home, which was against protocol, but I needed to figure out what was happening. The next day, I showed the drawings to my mom. She went pale. "When did he do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I explained that an inmate had drawn them, but she didn't believe me. "He must have seen these somewhere," she said, trying to rationalize it. But when I showed her the drawing of Adam, she fell silent. There was something in it that only we would know. The small Virgin Mary keychain hanging from his rearview mirror. Something he had just added recently. At work, I avoided Kyle. For the next few days, I focused on other tasks, but he seemed to know I was dodging him. Every time I passed his cell, he gave me that enigmatic smile, like he was waiting for me to say something. One night, when I finally worked up the courage to confront him again, he interrupted me before I could even speak. "Your mom's been taking good care of the plants, but she's been forgetting the one in the far left corner of the yard." My blood ran cold. How did he know that? After that night, I started avoiding Kyle's cell during my rounds. Every time I heard his voice or felt his eyes on me, it was like a weight pressing down on my chest. But avoiding him only worked for so long. One especially quiet night, as I was filling out reports in the supervisor's room, my name came over the radio. It was one of the officers on rounds saying that Kyle was asking to see me. Something about delivering an important drawing. I hesitated, but refusing would only raise suspicion. With trembling hands, I made my way to the solitary wing. He was standing in his cell, holding up a sheet of paper that looked freshly drawn. As I approached, he slid it across the floor, under the bars. "This one's for you," he said in that maddeningly calm tone. I picked up the drawing reluctantly. My heart nearly stopped. It was my house, drawn in such detail that only someone who had been there could have captured it. Every crack in the paint, every plant in the yard. In the corner of the page, he'd written something that made my vision blur. "You should take better care of your locks." I took the drawing with me, trying to mask my panic. As soon as my shift ended, I went straight to my car, locked the doors, and sat there, clutching the page like it might explode. How did he know where I lived? I drove straight home, and for the first time since I started working at the prison, I couldn't sleep. I spent the morning checking every door and window, reinforcing the locks, and even setting up a makeshift camera with my phone at the front entrance. But even with all the precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The next day, Kyle seemed different. He was calm, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made me feel like a trapped animal. When he saw me, he only said one thing before lapsing into silence. "They come when you sleep." I spent the rest of my shift trying to decipher what he meant. Was he trying to scare me? Or was there something more? I decided to go to the warden and report everything. I showed the drawings, explained the coincidences, and asked them to investigate how Kyle could have such personal details. The warden listened carefully, but his skeptical look made it clear he didn't believe me. "Are you sure you haven't mentioned your family around here? Inmates are great at picking up on conversations between officers," he said, almost as if blaming me. I tried to argue, showing him the drawings, but he just shrugged. "We'll keep an eye on him," he promised, but I knew it was just a way to brush me off. I left his office feeling helpless. If they weren't going to take this seriously, what else could I do? In the days that followed, Kyle kept drawing. And the drawings became even more disturbing. One showed my mom asleep on the couch, the TV glowing in the background. Another depicted my brother at work, wearing the shirt he had on that exact day. Each new drawing felt like a punch to the gut. He was watching my family somehow. The idea that someone could be spying on the people I loved left me teetering on the edge of panic, but I couldn't figure out how he was doing it. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. During my shift, I waited for a quiet moment and went back to Kyle's cell. This time, I was determined to get answers. "How do you know about my family? Who's giving you this information?" I demanded, trying to hide the fear in my voice. He stepped closer to the bars, his eyes locking onto mine. "I see them, that's all. It's not hard when you know where to look," he said calmly. Before I could respond, he stepped back and pointed to the corner of his cell, where a pile of crumpled papers sat. I picked up the papers, and among them, I found something that looked more like a journal than drawings. The pages were filled with messy scribbles, descriptions of places that felt disturbingly familiar, and fragmented sentences that made my skin crawl. One of them read, "What's locked always finds a crack." Another described my family's daily routines in terrifying detail. But what truly made my blood run cold was the last page. It was a drawing of me, done as if he had been watching me at that very moment. In the corner of the page, the words, "You shouldn't be here." Fear consumed me. I held the paper tightly, my fingers trembling as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I went back to the monitoring room and replayed the footage from the cameras pointed at Kyle's cell. The recordings showed him calmly drawing, with no access to any outside information. No one was passing him anything. But what terrified me most was noticing that, at certain moments, he looked directly at the camera, as if he knew I was watching. That faint, taunting smile was enough to make me turn away from the screen. I couldn't go back to his cell that night. Something was wrong, something that defied logic. But my curiosity wouldn't let me rest. I went home early, unable to finish my shift. When I walked through the door, I felt an unusual chill in the air, as though something wasn't right. The lights flickered slightly, and I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached my bedroom, the sight stopped me in my tracks. Drawings were scattered across my bed, the same ones Kyle used to make. But now they were here, in my home. Seeing those drawings made me realize this went far beyond Kyle. Something, or someone, was breaching the boundaries of the prison and invading my life in ways I couldn't explain. I gathered the drawings and began burning them in the backyard, but even the flames seemed to hesitate before consuming the paper. As I watched the portraits disintegrate into ash, I heard a noise near the fence. Something, or someone, was watching me. I ran back inside, locking every door and window, but deep down, I knew it was only temporary. Whatever this was, it was already inside my life. The next day, I requested a transfer to another unit of the prison. I couldn't handle seeing Kyle or his drawings anymore. My supervisors found it strange but didn't question me. I did everything I could to distance myself, even moving to a new house weeks later. But even now, months later, I still feel like I'm not alone. Sometimes I find drawings left in my car or my mailbox, each one depicting moments no one should know about. The last one showed my new house, with a chilling caption, "What's locked always finds a crack."